part of the reason people even listen to the United States and the global political system is because of the strength of the dollar and the strength of our financial markets. It's not because they like us. In fact, I think I haven't checked the international polls, but I don't think we're doing too well in that department right now.
All right, welcome back. He's an economics reporter in the business section of the New York Times. He's currently on book leave for a forthcoming Clout and Capital, which I'm looking forward to. He's born and raised, and I just found out is hanging out right here at his parents' house in New Orleans, Louisiana. It's Talmon Smith. Hey, Tal, what's up, man?
Hey, what's up, Tim? Glad to be here. And yeah, like you were saying, it's a shame we didn't do this in the studio. I think we found out too late that we were in the same place, but next time.
Well, I'm in my Kingpin t-shirt. We can do a beer at Kingpin next weekend.
Yeah, we'll definitely grab a beer.
And figure it out. And since you're at your folks' house, you can let them know. I think you have another distinction. I think this is the first sibling duo to have been on the Bulwark podcast now.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know
Clint on like a year or two ago about his book of poems. So a big moment for your mother. I'm sure she's very proud. I wanted to grab you because after the Lisa Cook news earlier this week and just do some Fed talk, what's happening with the economy broadly. Maybe a little Katrina anniversary stuff at the end. Yeah. But just at the top for listeners, like Econ 101. And on the one hand, it's like, obviously it's a big deal if anybody, in a significant position is being targeted by the president and his minions based on like spurious allocations and getting pushed out extra legally, from a job that should be independent. But like, really don't get it. Like, why is the Fed Board of Governors important? Like, what matters about this?
The Fed Board of Governors is the heart of the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, which is the voting body of the Federal Reserve, which controls interest rates, the money supply, helps regulate the banks, and has a mandate from Congress since about the 1970s to explicitly keep inflation stable and to also try to maximize full employment as well as financial market stability. What the Board of Governors is a firm 7-person committee that sits at the heart of the FOMC and therefore has a lot of power over interest rates that banks and that we all experience as households and consumers. The New York Federal Reserve, because New York is special in all things, also has a seat, the president of the New York Fed. And then there's a rotating cast of the 11, I believe, regional Fed presidents who are dispersed throughout the country at regional Federal Reserve banks, but they're rotating. And only 4 of them at a time sit there. So the Fed Board of Governors is this sort of central firmament in the institution. They're also appointed for 14-year staggered terms in order to protect them from political volatility. Stability, yeah. Yeah, and so Trump and his, you call them minions, I'll call them, folks in his administration, right? So that my editors don't get mad at me. They are being really aggressive in an unprecedented way in trying to fire Ms. Cook for cause, because regardless of the details.
Traditionally, the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, does not have oversight over hiring and firing of the Board of Governors. So I think
and apparently, I didn't know about this. I was talking with some folks that really spend a lot of their life and spend their careers focusing on, good governance and malfeasance. Nobody that I've spoken to really would have expected FHFA being involved in digging into the mortgage documents of powerful people throughout the government. You would have expected, if you were going to weaponize the government in this way, you would expect it to maybe come from the IRS. So, I mean, it's weird to use a euphemism there in several ways. Yeah.
So what are like the risks, right? I guess like dumb talk to us, right? It's like, okay, well, the Fed Board of Governors losing independence, Trump pushing out people he doesn't like, putting in, who knows, maybe potentially hacks. Like, let's talk about a worst case scenario. You don't exactly know who he'd replace her with, but let's assume it'd be a loyalist, like kind of like he's done in other parts of the government. Like, what are the risks associated with that? Just specifically on the economic side, like beyond the broader kind of autocracy discussion.
Yeah. No, I mean, you say dumb talk, and like I think it's a half joking tip to what I think is far too common, which is this idea that econ and the world of high finance are these things that are just it's hieroglyphics that nobody could possibly understand them. But I mean, the way that they function and the way that they find or lose stability is very similar to other institutions in our life and society. And so to hop into it, we can just go into the very recent past where we've seen the upsides of Fed independence, of the Fed Board of Governors being to operate independently. We saw inflation in the very recent past hit the high single digits. And yet when you look at market-based measures of inflation expectations, which are everything in financial markets and in public finance, because it essentially determines the price and yield, the interest rates on bonds, which then determine borrowing costs for everything.
Yeah, houses, cars, yeah.
Exactly. Houses, cars, the whole shebang, credit cards. Because inflation expectations through these market measures that people actually vote on with their feet, with their money and their clients' money, did not really budge. And they went up a bit. I think in 2022, it got into the high twos. So basically expecting over a certain time period, whether we're talking 5 years or 10 years, inflation expectations on an annual basis got up to the high 2%. But then they, maybe a bit over 3%, but then they pretty quickly came back down. Why? Well, in part because even though there are plenty of people in financial markets around the world, and there are plenty of people in financial markets in America that had no love for Joe Biden or his regulatory policies or what Lena Khan was doing or this, that, or the other, or that thought they overstimulated the economy. The idea was, come what may, we have people appointed by both Democrats and Republicans that are insulated from politics at the Fed that are just calling balls and strikes. And that undeniably is a linchpin of our system. And it is, actively under threat by people who are actively loyalists. Stephen Myron, he is a Harvard-trained economist who, over the past few years, has become very Trumpy in a way that has surprised and certainly upset some of the more, I don't even want to say moderate, but just like traditionalists in the priesthood of economics. And he, along with sort of actively helping Trump not tell the truth about certain things like tariff policy, he's also become more powerful and more trusted within Trump's orbit. And Trump is now trying to get him onto the Fed, onto the Board of Governors. And so this is not a empty threat. It's an active threat, because it is very hard to believe that if Trump said jump, Myron at this point wouldn't say how high when it comes to interest rate policy, and potentially even things like using the Fed balance sheet for the administration's own political goals. So
let's talk about like practical risks here. So let's say this goes through. Obviously, Lisa Cook is challenging this. So that her lawsuit was filed a couple hours ago. I'm just kind of scanning it, targeting Trump, and but if he's able to replace her, maybe fires Powell, like catastrophizes me a little bit. Like what are the potential negative impacts that would affect regular people? And we saw, on this news, the dollar tanked initially and then kind of rebounded some.
Right.
What are some things to be worried about?
Yeah. So let's start with the muddle through, and then we can get to worst case scenario, which is not. It's not like a meteor hitting the earth sort of probabilities. Like, I think a worst case scenario is not that far fetched. But let's start with the muddle through, which tends to be what the giant $30 trillion American economy does, is muddle through, even when annoying things happen, even when there's inequality, even when there's all sorts of things to complain about. There are other people that have been in the Federal Reserve System that have had to step down because, in their own words, they felt like they became a distraction from the FOMC's work. That usually had more to do with allegations of insider trading, yada, yada. Part of the reason I feel like markets have not freaked out as much as some feared is this idea of like, well, Trump just seems to not like this woman and has a bone to pick with her. And well, she does seem to have maybe done something sketchy with her mortgage applications. And it's just one board member, patronage and control. Whether they got, there's this very well-respected, relatively dovish Fed head, Waller, who may be next in line to be chair after Powell. So there are a lot of people betting on him bringing stability when Powell's term is up in spring of next year. So there's just this like maybe frog in boiling water, or maybe accurate idea that yeah, okay, well, like Trump has a bone to pick with somebody else in government. He does something a little outside bounds or outside the usual bounds, but we keep all chugging and we watch for NVIDIA earnings and we track, tariffs for inflation risk and let's all move along here. Don't pay attention to the Trump show. So there's a possibility that those folks are right. Here's the worst case scenario. The Fed has a meeting in mid-September, to decide on rate policy. Right now, I think markets are betting slightly in favor of a rate cut, because even though inflation is picking up a bit, in large part due to tariffs, the labor market's also slowing down quite a bit. So just on the merits, like there are, outside of the Trumpiness, extravaganza, there are reasons for,
economic slowing. The fact that the economy is getting worse is a case for Trump getting what he wants in a kind of a weird way.
Which is weirdly a replay of like the 2018 situation where Powell was a new Fed chair and Trump was violating norms in that case, but then like weirdly enough, the merits actually made sense that the Fed did cut rates on the merits, but it's funny how that might happen again. So let's get back to Cook. So maybe she decides to show up for work, because like she has said and her lawyers have said, no, you cannot do this. You can't fire me by tweet or by Zeet, X, Truth Social, whatever.
Bleat. We're calling them Bleat here.
You can't fire me by Bleat. And okay, well then let's say Trump sends the U.S. Marshals to remove her. That's not necessarily unimaginable. And then what do the courts do? Because that's so soon, right? It's August 28th when we're talking. Is this going to be resolved? Are we going to have a court injunction or a ruling of some sort by mid-September? We don't know. And then let's say there is a ruling that it's forgive me, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe the word is it's stayed. So she's able to, at least for now, be in the role. But then Trump says, I don't care about that lower court. I have my pals on the Supreme Court, and no, we're still going to either try to remove her from her office or block her from her office, or even just a Truth Social that says, hey, Lisa Cook, if you dare come into your office at the Fed, at the Eccles building in Washington, I will try to see to it that you don't get in. That's a real constitutional limbo with also kind of violent adjacent implications, right?
There's also like a step down from that. That's like, I'm not sending in the U.S. Marshals, but it's just like, you showed up to this. Let's say she shows up and they don't lower the rates, because like you said, it's a close call. And he's like, okay, fuck it. No, Powell's fired too. You know what I mean? Like that's another.
Yeah. No,
right?
We are not very far off from even further escalation.
And then let's just play game out. We're the Bulwark we love catastrophizing here. So game out the word. Unfortunately, it's come to fruition a few too many times. So we got to play it out now. So that happens. Some version of the worst case scenario happens.
Yeah.
Like what do we see as economic impact? It's like I mentioned earlier. Like when this happened, like the dollar tanked initially, but then kind of rebounded. The market's been pretty resilient. The bond market looks a little spooked, right? Like interest rates are high. What are some real economic impacts that people would feel?
Let's say that tariff-induced inflation is a little bit worse than we thought, right? When Biden left office, inflation was tilting back down towards the 2% target. But by some measures, it was mission accomplished, right? Like we had the Fed's target price stability back. The Fed had already cut in, I believe, September of last year and was essentially projecting that there would be room for further rate cuts down the road. And again, this is where we get to the then versus now. The idea then was that the what's called the long end of the Treasury curve, the 10-year especially, that's the benchmark. And the idea was, well, because the Fed is working on the merits, the 10-year would flow down. The 10-year, again, this benchmark interest rate that determines mortgage rates, which people are understandably very upset about because they're quite high. Car loan rates, which, same story, as well as credit card rates, same story. Everybody would like those to be going back down. The thing is, the cost of money is the biggest way that the Federal Reserve and all central banks, it's the biggest way that they exert downward pressure on the economy. If they're bringing rates down, if they're cheapening the cost of credit on the merits because, hey, inflation's coming down. We can let the economy flow a little bit more. We can let people have, borrow more cheaply. Let's let this thing run a bit hot. If you're doing that on the merits, well, then markets won't be skeptical and sell off assets that determine the price of longer term borrowing. They'll go along right with the Fed because the Fed is working off of merits. That makes sense. Inflation is going this way. Growth is going this way. It's all the parts of the system are working as they should. If Stephen Myron and potentially somebody that replaces Powell, who is, let's just be blunt here, seen by markets, right? Which is ultimately what matters, not you or me or a political podcast or columnists at any given newspaper. If markets think that Trump is put in a hack, and then he already has a loyalist that he's trying to put in, and then suddenly the FOMC starts voting in favor of what Trump would like rather than based on the merits of the economy, well, then you could see a drop in the dollar that isn't just an overnight flinch based out of fear, but based on an active decrease in central bank independence. Well, then you might see the selling off not just of U.S. Treasury bonds, but also a weakening of the dollar itself. And that gets to beyond the fact that would make mortgages more expensive again, buying a car more expensive again, on and on. Then you're also getting to like really funky geopolitical questions, because part of the reason people even listen to the United States and the global political system is because of the strength of the dollar and the strength of our financial markets. It's not because they like us. In fact, I think I haven't checked the international polls, but I don't think we're doing too well in that department right now. If in addition to not being liked, so that's, I guess, our soft power, we lose what is actually quietly one of the biggest sources of our hard power, which is our currency, which enables us to issue sanctions and to block people from being under our military umbrella, or to include them in our military umbrella. All that is backed by dollar dominance. And if that slips, then Trump, who cares so much about strength, actually would end up having this master plan of his completely backfire. And, putting Trump aside, I think what matters, is the people. It would terribly impact the people who put this guy back in because of, sort of rose-colored lenses of having an idea that 2019, 2018, for all of its cultural war, was more stable. And so he's actively undermining potentially the exact reason that he got back into office. I don't think people put Trump back into office because, they wanted him to take over the Fed.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're singing from my hymn book, which is the risk to the U.S., global stability and how that trickles down. But I mean, even at just a more micro level, right? Like, there's some dark irony in the fact that, like, he could do all of this to get interest rates down. Like, it does actually nothing meaningfully for people that are that have mortgages or more middle long-term rates because of the reaction of the bond market. That's like, that seems like a decently likely kind of outcome, frankly, of the situation.
Like I said, we could easily just muddle through. It's frustrating for people that operate in the take sphere, because like in a textbook way, when certain things, when there are certain bad policies enacted, you would expect there to be consequences. But, it's a $30 trillion economy. 70% of it is services, 70% of it is consumption. And a lot of the economy is just people paying their bills on time, and, two guys like us, chatting over the phone or on Zoom or whatever, and then going to get a beer, like, or you're buying your kids shoes because it's the start of school. Like, that's what's so odd about these moments is, and why I mentioned the idea of a frog boiling. Like, it will, by the time any of this gets to the point where it's disrupting daily life, it could be too late.
It's too late. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other broad, and we kind of covered this, just broad, like, state of the economy thoughts. And we had 229,000 jobless claims this morning. So market, which was about expectations. Yeah. Job market is a little tight, but not catastrophic. Stock market's kind of resilient. A lot of other bad signs kind of in macro of weakening economy. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. It's a very meh economy. and one of the things that would help is, we actually would have probably been in a similar situation. Let's say, to go back to the previous hypothetical, let's say Harris won.
Yeah.
A Harris administration is probably looking at an economy that after the booming job market of 2021 through 2023 was slowing down, and that probably needed lower interest rates in order to keep the business cycle going, right? And while there would have been disagreements about how she approached housing, right, which has been very hot this year, and this, that, or the other, regulations, which you have kept Lena Khan, at a base level. And let's take Harris out of it. A replacement level Republican that wouldn't have been obsessed with.
Well, there wouldn't have been tariffs.
That wouldn't have been obsessed with a global tariff campaign. Then there are some things happening in our economy right now that are structural, whether it's inequality, which is just god awful. And I know it's not sexy to talk about inequality anymore because that feels like so 2010s. But I mean, it's a real awful problem, and the lack of socioeconomic mobility in this country. There's also the threat of AI and the really scary fact that, for a lot of entry-level college educated folks, like some of these models are just as good as them, which is kind of coldless to say. But I mean, like I spent a good amount of my time talking to employers, and they actively are just like, why would I hire an analyst or a research assistant or
maybe because the models still I guess humans make bad mistakes too. The models still make some mistakes. I play a song at the end. I played a song at the end of every episode. I had Gary Kasparov on last week, and I was like, where has he been mentioned in music? Because I wanted to play one of the songs that mentioned Gary, and ChatGPT was like, oh, and LCD sound systems losing my edge. And I was like, whoa, you're in my wheelhouse now. I was like, that's not true. It's like, I know every word to that song. Maybe that's why.
The hallucinations are wild. And yes, no, I'm not, we're not at iRobot, for sure. But like there are structural things that would have happened regardless, but like it is really crazy. I know, Joe Weisenthal, he's a pal of mine. And like, I was talking with him and some folks recently who are also kind of in like the macro and finance world. And we were just talking about how like, it's so insane that like this Trump 2.0 group could have come in and like done all their culture war stuff and probably done like some pretty gross level of the xenophobic mass deportation and still had polls going okay for them and just done like nothing otherwise and just let the economy cool down as it was cooling down and then let the Fed do its job and then mortgage rates fall and then people are potentially back in that 2019 mood where everybody in MSNBC is tearing their hair out, but the rest of the country is like, he's kind of an asshole, but the economy's doing okay.
Doing nothing would obviously better. I know it's just this combo and all the thing. I mean, obviously the tariffs causing the light inflation, and then you have the BBB, which we haven't really mentioned, but that, the debt bomb there also is negatively impacting interest rates in the bond market.
I would disagree.
And then to your inequality point, it's just like a big transfer. Like all he's doing is a big wealth transfer. It's like a tax cut for rich people, and then tariffs are affecting, working class and
whereas last time he just cut taxes mostly for the rich and corporations, but he didn't really touch the entitlements. This time, he whacked the bottom and sprayed more gifts at the top, and then did a little bit of comparatively little and no tax on tips and no tax and overtime. But it's just I guess I shouldn't be surprised because so much of what seems to be powering this Trump 2.0 administration is not rationality, but it's just like if I was on that side and I was ever involved in politics, I'd just be like, do nothing.
Dude, it's golf. Kind of, golf, bro.
Literally, which is
golf.
Like
change the name of Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, which takes us to our final topic. I guess maybe you wouldn't have. Do we want America's name on the Gulf? Who knows what kind of torment it might cause going forward? But had he just done some name changes, and I think he would have been better off. Let's do the Katrina thing real quick. So tomorrow's the 20-year anniversary. When I had your brother on like a year and a half ago, he talked about how formative it was for him. And I meant to go back and listen to it, but I forgot. I'm kind of going from memory. I think he was a senior in high school or junior, and I guess you're younger, so it's maybe a little less.
Yeah, he's 6 years older than me.
Yeah, so less so. You were pretty young.
I was 11.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering what kind of like memories you have of that, like sort of the, significance you think of it is now 2 decades on. Do you have any other deep thoughts or
ruminations? Yeah, well, no, I don't have deep thoughts. My brother does deep.
Okay.
But I do have thoughts. It was awful. It was, speaking of inequality, it was really, I had a very Disney Channel childhood. It was, I had
Sweet Life with Cody and Tal.
Yeah, except imagine just oak trees in the bayou and Vietnamese and white and black friends, and we're all frolicking and having pool parties. Right? I like any 11-year-old, I didn't think about the deep inequality in my city and in the country that much. I was a fucking kid. And then I just saw how, we had the money and sort of means and social capital to just go over to my uncle's place and basically have vacation. And there were other 11-year-olds that were on their roofs or at the Superdome because either, they couldn't afford to evacuate or maybe they could. But the idea of, okay, well, then how are we going to get back? And, you also have to keep in mind, August 29th is the end of the month, and the 1st and 15th, if you're a person that is quite dependent on government assistance, once you get to the end of the month, you're running pretty thin. So there are a lot of people that would have left if this happened in early and mid-August, but that we're not able to.
Right.
And so that was, though I only learned the economic numbers there later on, I could just see, I was on my uncle's couch in Houston watching, on CNN, all the awfulness that was happening, Anderson Cooper and all the folks that were reporting it down there, which is, I think, part of when I look back at it, why I ended up being interested in journalism. But yeah, they're like, oh, wow, I'm here and I'm comfortable with my family. And there are all these kids just like me that weren't able to escape. That really haunted me for quite some time. And then I guess thinking about New Orleans now, it's just the doomerism around climate change is sometimes appropriate, but I really disdain, as we talked about regarding a certain article.
We'll just say it. We'll say it. You don't have to pick on them. I'll pick on them. These articles happen every other year or so, but the latest is The Economist. The headline is it's really a really sensitive headline for the 20-year Katrina anniversary. Does it make sense for the U.S. to keep subsidizing a sinking city? You always have all these, as if there's some alternative.
Yeah.
I guess maybe mass evacuate everybody to Baton Rouge would be the plan.
Well, no. Well, I mean, the plan, the implicit plan, and it's kind of, I know exactly. I've been an editor and I've been a reporter, so I know how one structures news stories. And so it gets quite explicit, but it's mostly implicit. The implied message through using the voices of other characters, shall we say, is that, it could be worth it to save New Orleans if it had the GDP of Miami, which is under threat, or the GDP of New York, which is obviously under threat. Anybody that's lived in Brooklyn knows how much the flooding risk of low-lying, parts of that area, and the subway is always flooding these days. Right? We could go on and on. There's the majority of the population, or something like that, near the majority of the population lives near coast, and a lot of people live in underlying areas. But you know what? That there's also people in at or below sea level in places like Amsterdam, right, and in places throughout the world. You know what happens? The government values the lives of those people. And unless there is actually a low population area, there are low population areas that are also facing climate risk. Okay, yeah, that makes sense to make some of those really bloodless or even cold-blooded calculations. But there's 1 million+ people in the greater New Orleans metro area. And to openly say in a always fact-checked and usually carefully reported magazine that the human capital folks down there is pretty low.
It's low human capital. It's just tourism. It's just tourism, because this stuff doesn't matter. It's just tourism, restaurants, music, food. It's all this is low capital, right?
Yeah. I don't imagine. I know some folks that are at The Economist now, or that have worked there before, who are okay eggs. But yeah, since they're being mean about my city, we can be a little bit mean to them. I don't know of too many people that likely work at The Economist that would be as fun to get a beer with down here in New Orleans compared with you. They're probably not the life of the party. So maybe that's part of why they don't understand why New Orleans is so great. Culture matters and people matter, and you can't value them purely in, their ability to consume or their likelihood of them filing a patent and being an inventor and keeping that human capital in the metro area. Like, it's just
we're doing high capital things like market timing, very like critics things that are very
I love economics. I think it's a really important way of analyzing the world. It's part of why I'm employed, is trying to understand it myself and then explain it to people. But there is a certain social Darwinism to it if you analyze it without context and without humanism. And ultimately we are humans in a society. And I think that matters most. So hopefully we that's the last of those sorts of articles from The Economist for a little while.
How do you feel being back just a little bit? You were young, obviously, so like the differences and stuff.
Yeah. But weirdly, I definitely don't remember 5 and under very well, but maybe this is just me. I have like a pretty good memory of 5 to 11. There are certain things of pre-Katrina New Orleans that I'll always miss and that, aren't ever going to quite be the same. But like there are things that are improving in New Orleans and that I think are great. And I think we have the possibility to recognize that with like a proper, dare I say, Green New Deal style investment in places like New Orleans, we can fortify our wetlands and learn how to live better with the water, desalinate the water. Right? I do what I really like about my colleague Ezra Klein's new book with Derek Thompson, Abundance, is like it takes these things that could be really awful seeming and like these challenges that are so large and kind of goes JFK style and says like, no, because it's hard, because it can sometimes feel overwhelming, let's put our brains together and learn how to solve these things. And then hopefully between, technology and democracy and this, that, and the other, hopefully we have, shorter work weeks and healthier coast and better water. And we all can spend more time reading and acting and dancing and and chatting about politics, right? This is, we'll always have things to argue about, but I don't think we need to argue about whether, certain cities should exist or not. So I'm going to go over to some of the memorials because there were lives lost. And I grew up, my family, my mother's side's very Catholic. So even though I'm not really a practicing Catholic anymore, I do still kind of consider myself a spiritual person. So definitely want to pay my respects. And then, I'm sure in New Orleans fashion, there'll be a bunch of really fun celebratory stuff going on this weekend too. So maybe I'll see you at
for sure.
One or two of them.
You'll see me around, man. It's good to see you. It's good to meet you and appreciate you very much. We'll be seeing you around town.
All right. See you.